background, Kevin.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight, special Valentine's Day edition with a gift for you, chat. You have your own corner of the space now. So after last week's session, Mala's like, "Hey, why don't you put chat on screen?" And this is a trust fall. We're doing a trust fall here. So chat, you're on screen. Speaking of Mala's here with us tonight. So how you doing, Mala?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Spicy takes. Well, we are going to actually, funny you mentioned this, tonight is also going to be the special rant edition of Shop Talk because Mala and Mike both started dropping rant-worthy material in my lap, and I could not help myself. Tonight's gonna be. I'm going to try not to say mean things. We're gonna see how well that works. So, are you sure you want to do that? No, but we're gonna try. We'll also try to do this for regular sessions. So, for example, tomorrow night, we'll have it for the meeting, and that way, if people look afterwards, they can see all the questions that I pointedly ignore when I ask them of the speakers. Did I say that part? That's the part I was supposed to say real quiet, not the part out loud. So, couple of things coming up. SQL Bits, March 8th through the 12th. Mala, you're presenting there, yes?
Yes, I will be presenting on ScriptDom. I very much look forward to it. It's my first time at this conference. I wish I could go in person, but sadly I can't do that. Really expensive, and now is not a good time either in any other way. But I will be presenting remotely with a friend from Belgium, Cohen Verbuck. I hope I said his name right. But yeah, we are going to be presenting on ScriptDom, and there are a bunch of pre-cons that are really, really good. And the cost, I think, for attending online is about $400. In my opinion, totally worth it given the speaker lineup. So if training budget, it may be worth looking into.
So yeah, check that out. It is coming up in the next less than a month actually. And
I posted a discount code on the Slack.
Mala's got a discount code. Well, we're gonna dig up what that discount code looks like, and there's a lot of ranting that I have to scroll back up through.
That's okay. So, don't worry about it. It's not worth that much.
5% discount code for user group members. Contact us at sqlbits.com. So what you do is you would email contact us at sqlbits.com, and then you would tell us the user group leader's name, which is probably me. Don't literally say me, because it's probably not you. Unless you are me, in which case I guess you could say me, but otherwise tell them I sent you. I'm sure DBAs have their CPE requirements like us security cats. Yes, they definitely have continuing education. Sounds worthy. SQL Bits is a really good conference. It is definitely worth attending, especially if you have a time machine that takes you back prior to 2020, and then you could go in person, and then it's a really good experience. I've never actually been in person, unfortunately. The year that I was selected just happened to be the year that it went virtual. Hi, Damu. Welcome to chat. So the other bit is that Dev Intersections is coming up. Dev Intersections is the combination of a whole bunch of different tracks. There's developers, database people, AI folks, security, a little bit of security. But if you use the discount code Azure DC, you can save $100 off of that as well. So 2 conferences coming up. That one's in April. Got about 6 weeks or so to prep for that one. Okay. I'm all limbered up. Mala's done the jumping jacks and toe touching exercises to stretch out for this one, because this is going to be a doozy. Um, bring on the rant. Oh, the rant is coming. First, I must give you the link because you need the link. The article is. Let me read the title. Learn from Google's data engineers. Dimensional data modeling is dead. And this kind of reminds me of Nietzsche saying God is dead, and then the joke is Nietzsche is dead, signed God. And I'm gonna say dimensional modeling, no, it is not dead. So the gist of the article, I'm gonna try to summarize this as well as I can. The gist of the article is you too can pay more money to be stupid. And let me explain how. You see, dimensional modeling was for back in the days when we cared about storage. But storage is almost free, which is why when I look at my Azure bill, I don't have to pay for storage. When I look at AWS, I don't have to pay for storage. Google's an enormous company. We've got storage. But yes, but I don't work at Google. See, I work at a company that has budgets. Also, the time required to perform all necessary operations for data analysis is minuscule. Really? Really? Are we really going there? Have you looked at the price of things? See, if you don't have trillions of dollars of market cap, it turns out you actually have to pay real money for actual processing. And if you do it in a really poor fashion, that makes your storage costs larger. It makes your compute costs larger. It makes your costs larger. And then you've got a CTO or a CEO or a C somebody who says, Kevin, why did you spend $38,000 on warehousing this month? Our normal bill is $2,000. Oh, well, I read this article that dimensional modeling is dead and that I don't have to care about storage or compute because Google doesn't care about it. Now, dimensional models are difficult to understand. That is actual quotation from the article. And not really. So, dimensional modeling was designed specifically because it makes sense to the business users. Let's walk down Kimball path for a second here. Kevin says, take it from my paycheck. Kevin does not say anything along those lines. Kevin's paycheck is sacrosanct. Nothing touches Kevin's paycheck because he will go crazy knife fight about that. So we're going to take a walk down Kimball Lane. Why do we have dimensional models? What is the point of a dimensional model? And the point of a dimensional model is business people don't necessarily have a great grasp of relational modeling.
Correct.
They want something that is easier to understand, that uses their terminology, that uses fairly easy syntax, and that integrates well with the tools that they use. Excel, Power BI, Tableau, pick whatever graphics engine you want to use. If you want to talk about people using Cognos and Crystal reports and that kind of stuff, okay. But this is intended to be easy for them. The way you make it easy for them is that you actually talk to the business people and you hear the words that they are using and you parrot those words until you pretend that you understand what the words mean. And then you put those words in a database and they query based off of those words. So that's kind of how the process works. Or you actually communicate with the business people, understand what the actual purpose of this data is, and conform the data to the different business units. Meaning, business unit A calls it a customer. Business unit B calls it a client. Business unit C calls it a user. Business unit D calls it a meat widget. We take those and we figure out what is the appropriate term, what are the things that commonly apply to all of these, and we create dimensions. These dimensions help explain the data. We collect the relevant measures, the things that people want to calculate, the things that people want to display, aggregate, sort, filter, and work with. Now we have facts. Profile ID. So Solomon, that's profile ID and client ID. That's a thing. Not anymore, though. All of that is dead. It's been dead for years. Have one version of truth for business people to use. Yes, that's another big factor of dimensional modeling. That by conforming dimensions, you can now say, we have a customer dimension. The customer dimension has these attributes on it. And there is one definition of this is what a customer is. I don't care if internally you call them meat widgets. This is a customer. And, we can alias that as meat widget if you really, really want to. But a customer is here. And we're not going to have the customer with different attributes combined together. We do a lot of work to figure out what is the actual customer across all of those business units, tie that all together. There's quite a bit of effort involved in the process. Or for the facts, we have a common understanding of what is the calculation for revenue. What is the calculation for net income? What is the calculation for gross margin or churn? We have these common definitions that are going to apply across the business so that one department can't say the churn rate is 7%. Another department says that it's 28% because they're using different calculations. They're using different ways of measuring it. We have commonality. And so if you have good tools and you know how to design dimensional models, no, they're not difficult for users to understand. They're actually a lot easier for users to understand than whatever hodgepodge of garbage you're going to replace it with. Mm-hmm. Or, if you want to be really fair, the person says, use the source systems, Luke. And, okay, here is my source system. Now, I've written some gnarly queries to retrieve data from source systems for analytics purposes, because those things are not typically designed for advanced analytical reporting. If your argument is the users don't understand dimensions in fact, and then you're going to have them write, say, a couple thousand line long stored procedures to retrieve data in a way that hopefully gets the data they need, or you start introducing, hey, we need you to start writing recursive common table expressions because the way that we store this data, you have to navigate through it hierarchically.
Dimensional modeling was never designed for storage space, was it, Kevin? That's not my understanding. It's for denormalizing for performance.
It is for understanding. So performance is a factor, but really it's to help the business people understand the data and to have, like Damu mentions, one common source of truth. Your warehouse is the place where everything gets figured out and you have the ultimate answers to life. The source systems are the record. They're the source of the data. They're the source of record. But we understand that source systems have all kinds of funky data in it. And the warehouse is in our idyllic platonic, our platonic form of warehouse has this pristine data, common understanding, single definition for a thing that is then just used by everybody within the organization so that we all are speaking the same language. Mm. So you're right. It is not intended to minimize storage. If anything, it is intended to expand storage for the sake of simplicity. So let me hit chat here. Was client ID a search-only thing? Yes, it was. Although there is a definition for a client ID that was different from everybody else. So Solomon and I are talking a little shop talk within shop talk. So that was, you got Inception here. How often are these X technology is dead predictions correct? I remember an article from about 2010 predicting that C# is dead because JavaScript can run on the server. I would say about 999 times out of 1,000, they are hot takes intended to drive clicks with no real understanding of the problem or the solutions. And so, yeah, almost never is X technology actually dead. And if we go back to it, how many technologies can you think of that are really, really dead? And before you think, throw out answers, COBOL is not dead. Ada is not dead. Mumps is still around.
Mainframes are not dead.
Shoot, mainframes were replaced by the cloud. Clouds are mainframes. Sony VHS. Maybe. You can still buy VHS recorders. You can still buy players. I don't think they're gonna come back like records have, vinyl, but who knows? There may be some nostalgia trip where people come back with VHSs. So, but you folks are thinking about physical technologies. Think programming languages. Think server systems. Cold Fusion is still around. Remember Cold Fusion, the web programming framework?
Yeah, of course.
Around.
Yeah. Pascal is still around. I had a friend tell me Pascal. Anybody remember Pascal?
Yeah. Pascal is still around. Mike says PDP-8 assembly language. Yep, there's a small cottage industry in PDP-8 work.
Fortran too.
So, in short, depending on your definition of dead, now if you say, yeah, Macromedia Flash is dead, right? That is gone. So yes, a technology can die. IE6 is dead. I would like to introduce you to some X-ray machines at hospitals that are running Windows 98.
Netscape.
BlackBerry is dead.
Netscape is dead, Kevin.
What's that, Mala?
Netscape.
Well, Netscape begat Mozilla, which begat Firefox. But you know, we're talking about exceptions, which generally the exception is, okay, this is centrally controlled by an organization and that organization is gone. So yes, Netscape Navigator is no more, but then its legacy lives on.
Basic is probably no more. Anybody knows Basic is around? I haven't heard much of Basic.
I'm not sure. Basic. So, I mean, you've got Visual Basic. Granted, VB.net is in its death throes. But you know what?
Visual Basic is different. Visual Basic is not the original Basic. Visual Basic.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of different basics. And Visual Basic just happened to be one of them. It was like not even Microsoft's first attempt at Basic. But
VB Script. How about VB Script?
Thankfully, it's mostly gone. However, you go to large shops, I'll bet you there's a fair number of them still running VB
Script. Some scripts I wrote with it are still in existence at one place I have worked at. They still use them.
Yeah, because it still works.
Yeah.
Like, this thing has worked for 15 years. Why do I need to rewrite it in another language with the eventual goal being for it to work almost as well as it did before? So they had to thaw out some frozen programmers for COBOL support recently. State of New Jersey had its desperate search for COBOL people. They were paying good money for that. And I have
a funny story. I had a friend whose wife was a COBOL programmer. She gave it up when they got married and started to raise a family. And he is a pretty well-paid consultant. I'm not sure what he works on, but something really state-of-the-art consultant. And he was looking for work. And the headhunter used to call to talk to him about jobs, and he somehow got talking to the wife, and she landed a job in COBOL making more than he does. This was just about a year or so ago. Like literally 15 years after she had given up working on it.
Yep, but he has enough experience or was willing to do it.
Uh-huh.
And I think what'll end up happening is eventually the pay will be good enough that they'll say, we'll just bring in more people. We'll train people in using COBOL.
Right.
And my hot take for the day, because we're going to talk about terrible hot takes, so let me throw out my own. COBOL's not a bad language.
No.
It's not a language
No,
I want to
not
use.
at all. Yeah.
But COBOL, the reason COBOL got the reputation that it did is because a lot of software developers tend to be, I would say, minimalist typists, meaning that all of my variables are single character, X, I, J, L. And if I can use 6 inscrutable characters to describe a workflow, I would rather use those 6 characters, even though I can never read it afterwards. Solomon made a joke about Perl. I'm making a joke about Perl. And that's where a lot of developers go to. I mean, the fact that code golf is a thing, that you can go on one of the Stack Overflow variants and play code golf. Can you solve this problem in the fewest number of characters, and what language? And then people have purpose-built languages to solve algorithmic problems in a few inscrutable characters. That's the type of bias that we've seen in application software development. And so, by contrast, a very verbose, almost English-like language like COBOL, it feels like, I'm typing forever to get this one thing to show up is 200 lines of typing. Yeah, but you know what? A business analyst could read that afterwards and understand exactly what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
There are benefits to it.
Yes.
Just as there's a difference between hardware and software being dead, so there is between software and languages and paradigms and methods. I automatically corrected Solomon there on method versus methodology, even though I am probably one of a handful of people in the world who actively care about the difference between method and methodology. All of us can fit in a phone booth, but we don't want to be near each other. But anyhow, you're right. There is a huge difference between piece of software X is no longer used because it's 30 years old and has been replaced by piece of software Y versus concept. The concepts of functional programming came about in the 1930s as a branch of mathematics, and they've waxed and waned. Object-oriented programming has been around since at least the 70s in concept, in implementation since the 80s. And Lisp, well, Lisp is not a functional programming language. It is actually a different branch of mathematics. I got corrected on that one time from an FP person. And he only knew because he made that comment and somebody else corrected him. I could dig up a link. There was a chapter of a book that was published online that clarified where Lisp fits. That it's not really functional, that it's a different subset of mathematics. So, all right. If dimensional modeling is dead, which, spoiler alert, it's not, what do you do instead? Well, the author says, you use data lakes. And that's where collectively we facepalm, because the purpose of a data lake is completely different from the purpose of a data warehouse. See, you use dimensional models for warehousing. I need to answer known business questions. I need to answer those with some rapidity. I want to have those available to my users for fairly rapid querying. And I want to have that clean, finished, easily accessible, well understood data set. Now, data lakes. Data lakes are extremely valuable. I like data lakes a lot. I can use data lakes to create data warehouses. But a data lake is a completely different story. That data lake is more for long-term data storage. It is intended for tracking changes in data over time. It's intended for storing data that doesn't fit well in a relational model. It's intended for data spelunking, for ad hoc processing. I need to do this one-off query that I'm not going to need to do again probably. And therefore, I don't want to take all of the time and effort to get it into a warehouse. Getting data into a warehouse, very expensive. We talked about the processes. You have to talk to other humans. I mean, that's pretty taxing in itself. You have to change ETL processes. You have to change the warehouse. You have to test your loads. You have to make sure that everything adds up correctly. Make sure that it didn't mess anything else up. You do this because people need the data. They need verification that this is valid. You don't just take whatever garbage is in a source system, dump it in a warehouse, and say, cool, I'm done. I mean, not unless apparently you're this guy, but maybe that was being too mean on my part. But for that warehouse, yes, there's a high barrier to entry. However, why do we do this? Because we're going to run that report hundreds of times. We're going to put thousands of queries through. We're going to run this very regularly, and we need the same results. This is where, for example, you have Sarbanes-Oxley, where the CFO signs off that my numbers are correct, and I get to go to big boy jail if those numbers are wrong. By the way, if your C-levels have to go to big boy jail, you're probably not going to be long for the company. This is also why you don't store like financial data in data lakes or in non-relational storage typically, because your CFO likes being out of prison. Orange is not a very flattering color for most people. So just a life lesson here. So don't people spelunk in caves rather than lakes? There's a lot of lakes inside of caves. How often do programmer?
I love that, Kevin.
How often do programmer architects mix metaphors? We mix metaphors like concrete. Damu asks, can the data lake be used as a preliminary phase to validate and show the data to business users before creating DW artifacts? Absolutely. Yes, that is actually one of the really good uses of that data lake is if I have a one-off query, or if I have a person who says, I think I have an understanding of where I'm going with this, but I'm not quite sure. This is where your data lake can be extremely helpful. Okay, let me work with you on creating this query of this data. Yeah, it's not in the warehouse. It's going to be slower. Querying data lakes is usually slower. It's going to probably take a bit more development effort. However, if we get this answer right, and this is what you need, and you need it regularly, then yeah, we can bring that into the warehouse and turn it into regularly consumed report. So it's definitely a valid use. And this is where, for example, with Azure Synapse Analytics, you have dedicated SQL pools, which are your warehouses that use dimensional modeling, and the serverless SQL pool, which is T-SQL written over a data lake. In AWS, you have Redshift, which is dimensional modeling. And then you have things like Athena, which is writing HiveQL over data in your data lake or in S3 buckets. So you've got these different purposes for data lake versus a dimensional model. And the dimensional model can be completely loaded from the data lake. That's not a bad pattern. We can take all of that source data, dump it into a data lake. We can do all of our curation, all of our data corrections, the source transformation processes, and then feed that data through and eventually put it into a warehouse model for those business people regularly to query. I'm cool with that. But we still have the dimensional model at the end of the day. And so that article, hot garbage. And by the way, what's really funny is, so Mala sent that a couple days ago, and the next article is going to be even more fun. But before I get to that, in SQL Server, any concerns with merging daily partitions where there are no rows for those dates to a yearly partition to reduce the number of partitions?
Merging daily partitions.
So the one concern that I see with merging is if you've got a huge amount of data, then it will take time to do that movement. If there's literally no data, then yeah, the merge is it can be if I remember right, it can be a metadata level operation, but don't quote me on that. Most likely.
No, that's valid, Kevin. I'm not sure why you say you don't want to be quoted, because I've heard that on many fronts. I think I've heard Kimberly say that too, that if you want to merge it, the size is important.
Oh yeah, no, that part you can quote me on.
Right.
It's whether you have a partition that's kind of in between two partitions with data, but that partition in the middle doesn't have data. If when you merge, that is metadata only, or if it's not. I can't remember offhand. But the short answer, if you're doing that kind of merging, as your data sets grow larger, then that merge operation can be kind of slow. It's only fast when you have empty partitions that you're combining together. So like if you say there, if most of your rows are empty, then yeah, merge them together. That's no big deal. It's where you start having, once you're starting to merge it together with things that do have data. The old partitions are the empty daily ones. Yeah, you merge away, and that'll give you some ability to create new partitions. Now, one thing, if we were talking a little wish list stuff, I would love to see better support for time series style rollups like we see in things like InfluxDB, where I could say, I want this table to store data at the second grain for 1 day, and then at the minute grain for 1 week, and then at the hour grain for 1 month, and then at the daily grain for 1 year, and so on. And just have it automatically do that aggregation in the background. I'd love to be able to see that, especially if you limited it to just saying additive facts only, and had that be a process. You can certainly do it yourself. You could have separate tables. Actually, it's probably what I'd really do is have separate tables and a view to union them together. But that's a fair amount of extra dev work. And when you create a table in Influx, you can specify those retention rules very easily in a way that I haven't seen any relational database platform really do well. Azure SQL Edge introduces some of those ideas, so I'm hopeful SQL Server gets it. I'm sure Postgres has something that approximates what I want. It may even have what I want. I haven't dove into that too much, but that's more of a wish than a rant. So, article, this is a fantastic article. I love this article, and I'm being completely serious about that. Why we at Famous Company switched to hyped technology. And this is sort of the single-purpose takedown of so many of these. When I joined, learn from Google's data engineers. Dimensional data modeling is dead. Mm-hmm. And the gist of this article is it's definitely a parody of those types of articles that, we had this.
It's very funny, Kevin.
Yes. We had this reasonable system running, but it just wasn't popular enough. We weren't getting, enough Hacker News listings or enough upvotes on our social media. So then we decided to switch to something completely different. And we just happened to pick the thing that is currently in vogue. And wow, look at us. We're a big company. We've got thousands of engineers sitting around twiddling our thumbs. We can afford to waste so much money on these things that don't provide any value. You should do the same thing like us. You'll drive your company out of business, but who cares? I won't care because I'm at big company. That's the short version of that. And, when you see a lot of company tech blogs, that's a thing to keep in mind. That, when Netflix talks about this thing that they're doing, how many billions of dollars does Netflix have to throw around? The answer, certainly more than I do. Also, appropriate use of the stonks image. So I got that. That's going to be good. When you have a SSD array storage, does it make sense to split a few disks into one to create disks, or one big pool of SSDs, good enough for log data and tempdb? That one deserved a drink beforehand. Before I answer that, and before it scrolls off screen, orange is the new green bar. I did like that, Solomon. I thought that was a good joke. Okay, SSD storage, or think of it as I have a SAN. Should I use my SAN as one big array of disks, or should I carve out subsets from the SAN? And I will say that when I started really getting into the DBA world, let's call it about a decade ago, the advice typically was, we want to get as many spindles as possible. And given that we're talking spindles, obviously this was spinning disk days. But SSD was just getting into vogue at medium-sized companies. So we wanted to get as many separate disks as possible working on this so that we had basically scale out of disk. And so the advice was generally look to maximize number of spindles. A lot of newer SANs don't even allow you that capability. They essentially say carve out some amount of disk from the SAN and we'll manage it. You can tell us if it's RAID 5, RAID 10, but we'll manage it otherwise. So in many cases, the short answer is, well, you don't have much choice. Now, when you're talking about a cloud provider, and I'm going to use Azure as the specific example here, because for a long time, IOPS in Azure was tied to the number of disks. So in other words, every new disk that you added some number of IOPS. And actually also was tied to the size of the disk, which meant if you want more IOPS, you had to get larger disk. So I'd have 5 terabytes of disk for databases that were like 100 gigs, just because I needed to have enough IOPS to support the problem. That has changed a bit. You can definitely push more IOPS in Azure without having to create a bunch of separate disks. And so I think that pattern has changed somewhat. I don't think it's as important today to focus on trying to split out a lot of disks and join them together in Windows to create your mega drive. But unfortunately, the best answer I can give you is it's something you'd have to test out, because it's going to depend on what your systems look like, what kind of SAN are you using, or if you're using cloud, what the solution offers in terms of IOPS per disk, what tier you're in, premium, standard, extra premium, 93 octane, whatever. So you'll have to basically work out what is the number of IOPS that I need, and then you can find different ways of getting there. Now, if you were looking at sheer maximization that I am running enormous workloads incredibly fast, at that point you're talking about direct attached storage. You say, I don't want a SAN. SANs are too slow. I understand. SAN administrators like SANs because it means they administer one thing. But if we're talking microsecond performance, I need direct attached storage. I'm not, and also probably not using a cloud for microseconds. So it's going to depend on your situation. Short stroke that spinning disk. Yeah, it's reminding me back of the really old days in Oracle where I need to lay out this index such that the different pages, basically, I know how long it takes that head to spin. And so if I can lay out the pages so that the head cycle rate kind of leads me to the next page for that disk alignment, or I know that I need to have an empty file that's this large so that I can get so far out on the disk head on the platter before I write my data. That was the type of information that made you a really good DBA back in the late 90s. I remember when a DBA at the hospital I worked at thrashed the Clarion LUN we gave him, and we had it warranted within 6 months. That is success. I call that winning. Read askew. Yeah, where you try to have it balanced out because you know how fast that head spins, and also the fact that it spins slower on the outside of the platter versus the inside. And so you'd pack enough of your data inside because it would spin faster, and you'd have those big. Actually, I had it backwards. You had the big files on the outside, so that you'd focus on the inside of the platter. This was all before my time, so if I got parts of that wrong, feel free to castigate me. But also realize that very little of that information matters anymore because we're usually not using spinning disks for anything valuable in the data world. So more of just something that you can take with you as geek cred. But yeah, I appreciate breaking LUNs, breaking SANs. I am all in favor of that. Because that means you're doing your work. Or it means that, you have a really horrible data model that's knocking things over. In which case, woof. Speaking of woof, we're going to let Mala do a little rant.
You cut out a few times. I'm not sure why. I'm pretty sure it's not my internet, but something, yeah. Like
what's this wee stuff? All right, so let's go on to our final rant of the night. Our final planned rant of the night. Mala, I think you linked that tweet. So the question was around database normalization, and actually it originally came from, do you know what fifth normal form is? And it was a Twitter poll. And there's a little bit of a response of, hey, who teaches fifth normal form? The tweet there reads that we, the person who wrote the tweet is a professor, we stopped teaching normal forms in 2018. As I told students in the class, the only thing you need to know about normal forms is that they exist. That's it. And there was a link to a YouTube video, which was cut to a point in the class in which the professor, within about 30 seconds, did say that. And I said to myself, I'm done. Mala, would you like to rant for a little bit while I wind myself up again?
So, if I were a student in that professor's class and I went out and tried to look for a database job after that, and I'm asked, simple questions on how I would structure a database, if I wasn't taught normalization, I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have an absolute clue of where to even begin. That's one thing. So, I mean, it's one thing to say, not to get terribly caught up in what the rules are and not look at, real situations. It's quite another thing to say we don't need to have any rules whatsoever, or, you just have to learn learned that there are no duplicates in data, and that's all it really is about. I wish it was. I really wish it was. If you're tasked with how to analyze a database that hasn't been analyzed data in a database that hasn't been normalized, right? Good luck with it. Or if you have, if you have to maintain stuff that somebody hasn't, designed right over time, and it's been around for a long time. Everybody, who's had some experience as a DBA or database person has been through stuff like that. I would say statistically about 80 to 90% of performance issues and issues with analyzing data, messy data, are to do with the fact that somebody took a shortcut to normalization. In the vast majority of cases I've dealt with, that's been the way it is. And to me, just trivializing something that is literally the backbone of how you design relational databases, that's completely unacceptable. That is my rant.
All right, that was a good rant, Mala.
Hmm.
So if it's not normalized, 80% of the data would be duplicates. Yeah, there's usually a lot of duplication, and don't worry, the app will solve that. The app will prevent that. Spoilers, the app doesn't prevent that. Just blame it on the network guy. Hey, that's usually a good strategy. So let me give my take. This is going to be a slow burn rant. It's going to slow burn, but we kind of have to understand what is the point of normalization. And I will say, starting off in fairness, normalization in its formal logic manner is underused in industry. I don't want to say not used. That I think is incorrect. That nobody uses it, definitely wrong. All right, I guarantee it's wrong because I use it. I am in the industry. Therefore, that statement is incorrect. But if we want to, smooth it out, oh, well, very few people use it. Even so, I think that's still incorrect. Because normalization is about a
If he
lot.
wants to say very few people use it, that's not a compliment to the people who don't use it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ignorant people are liberally sprinkled through academia to keep the economy producing full employment. Half of them break and half of them fix at different industries. Sorry, Mike, that just reminded me of the old joke that we take the 535 dumbest people in the country and put them where they can do the least harm, which is Congress. He laughs because he knows the network guy is the crucible on which all latency can temporarily, at least, reside. Yes, and also that they rarely have the tools needed to be able to prove anything either way, so it's a really convenient scapegoat. Okay, normalization. Normalization is the logical consequence of set theory and relational design. When you start getting into relational theory, when you focus on the operations of sets, the concepts of normalization come as a logical consequence to it. This is not some arcane practice. This is the fundamental implications of the mathematics involved. And it's not about preventing duplicates. It is about getting your data model correct. It is about understanding how the domain applies to the mathematical side. So, in other words, I need to map my understanding of the domain, the real world, to what tools are available to me mathematically such that I can store, retrieve, process information in my domain using these tools that are available. Normalization gives us guidelines and rules that we can follow to ensure that this mapping happens appropriately and that we do not introduce mistakes. Many of the different normal forms are intended to resolve specific types of error, specific classes of error. And so the one that people know immediately, first normal form, one of the things that it helps us prevent is duplication. Mm-hmm. Technically, technically, duplication is prevented by the fact that we're using sets to begin with, and sets can't contain duplicates. But in the real world, the databases, relational databases, are not truly set-based. So when we work with that knowledge, okay, yes, prevent duplication. Preventing duplication is very important. Getting rid of out-of-sync duplicates, that's another problem. But then we have additional concepts in normalization, the normal forms, that handle things like update anomalies. I have updated this record. Why does it show up as the old value? Oh, well, that's because we wrote it to two places. This is otherwise known as the document database problem. It's known that way because I just labeled it that, where if I write a thing in two different places, inevitably I only update one of them because I forgot that I wrote to the other one.
Mm-hmm.
The more places you write to, the more likely you're going to have those types of anomalies. Mm-hmm. Normalization, by understanding the domain and applying the rules of domain logic and relational theory, will help us get a grip on, here is the information. It exists here. I do not need it to exist in other places. It should not exist in other places because it already exists here.
Right.
Which is how we resolve update anomalies. Mm-hmm. We also have ways of understanding what things need to be combined together so that we prevent other types of anomalies. So, for example, one of the things that the follow-up tweet on there was that most people don't use functional dependencies and Armstrong's axioms in the real world. Well, I'm going to disagree with that. People may not know that they're using functional dependencies, but they're using functional dependencies. So if I tell you I have a city and I have a state, we may say the city resides in a state. Maybe. Now, if I tell you Kansas City, well, Kansas City is both in Missouri and Kansas. So we can't have city determine state, which is why we need the combination of city and state. Congratulations, that was just a functional dependency that we talked about. Meanwhile, a house can reside in a census district. And census districts are aligned so that a house, let's just say, I don't want to say this for sure because I'm sure that somewhere is screwed up, that a house is within one census district. That when we drew the map, we made sure that the box is squiggly so that that house wasn't split in the middle. Interestingly, if I remember right, apartment complexes can be split in the middle, but houses should not. So if we have a house, a street address, we therefore can map that to a single census district. And that is a functional dependency. If I have this, then I can guarantee what this is. If I have this, I may not be able to guarantee what this is because it's a function. Any element of the domain maps to one and only one element of the range. But you can't say anything about the domain from the range. So, functional dependencies, real thing. Very important to know. If people explain them in a way that makes sense, that you can talk about in business terms, they're going to be really helpful. And in fact, we implicitly use normalization when we do these sorts of things. Why do I have an address table? I didn't just think of address has got to be its own table because magic. And what do we put in an address table? Do I put a person's shoe size in an address table? No, because that's dumb. Shoe size doesn't belong in an address. And the fact that I can say this is dumb, and I probably don't have anybody on the other side saying, well, hang on, Kevin, I put shoe size in the address table all the time. At least not seriously. Like if Anders was here, he'd probably do it just to pull my leg. But the fact that I can say that and you can understand it and agree with it is itself it's telling. We understand functional dependencies. We may not have the term. We may not understand the concept as such, but we understand the application of the concept. And we can do that intuitively. Now, your intuition can be wrong. That is where the formal study can pay off. This is where I would like to have a professor who can explain what a functional dependency is, how you can understand what a functional dependency is, and then how you can work with a business person to help elicit from them functional dependencies.
Yeah.
And we do this. We still do this even without that formal training. Because when I'm talking to a business person, oh, so you need to get a shoe size. Well, people have different sets of shoes, and different companies have different sizes. Do we need just one shoe size from a person, or do we need multiple shoe sizes? Do we need the size of every individual pair of shoes they've bought? Or do we just need, what is their general shoe size? Like, oh, well, we just need to capture their general shoe size. Okay, we now know that for a person, there's a functional dependency on shoe size. If I know the person, I know that they have a shoe size. Meanwhile, if they went the other way, we know that there is not a functional dependency, because for one person, I can have multiple shoe sizes, because this brand, I'm a size 12. This brand, I'm a size 13. Here, I'm a 12E. Here, I'm a 12D. How about Italian shoes? Oh, all right. I got a quick story about that. So I went to Italy, bought some leather shoes. Nice, really nice shoes. Probably best shoes I've ever owned. And the lady who was selling is probably like a 40-ish year old lady, and then her mother. And they ran the shoe shop. So it was a very small shoe store. And I was looking at different shoes, and I'm like, oh, those look nice. Those look nice. And now they couldn't speak English. I can't speak Italian. But the mother, the old lady, pointed out these shoes, elegante. And then she points to my feet, grande. Like, you can't fit in that. It's not going to work. So come over here. Let me show you the boat shoes that you're going to be able to fit in. And despite them being boat shoes, not literally boat shoes, but they were pretty big. They were big shoes. Still the nicest shoes I've ever had. Okay. I worked with a dev, a good one, years ago, that argued that we don't need foreign keys because the rules will be handled by the app. Years later, after working on such a system, he apologized. Usually what happens. And for us non-database people, what are the different types of normalizations? So, Mike points out 1st through 6th normal forms. And the best that I can do for you right now, Mike, is to point to my video, if I can find it. I actually did, for this user group, a talk
I'll find it, Kevin. I was listening to it today. I'll find it for you.
Oh, okay. So I did a talk. It's called Perfectly Normal, and it is an advanced primer on normalization. So that sounds like me. All right. So Mala will post that link in chat. You can watch that later, Mike. I also have the slides and info.
It's an excellent talk, by the way, everybody. Worth listening, and you need to really focus and listen.
It is definitely more academic than the normal talks. But actually, I think that's a thing that we're missing in the community. Yeah, the professor says, well, nobody in the industry uses this. A, he's wrong. But B, that's a condemnation of the industry, it's a condemnation of the industry and a condemnation of academia, because academia generally does a horrible job of explaining this stuff. I've seen 2 people explain functional dependencies really well. I've not really seen anybody really explain join dependencies well. That fact, yeah, it's difficult. All right, I understand that. But your job as a professor, a big part of your job is to inform people, to teach people, to provide information and insight in a way that people can understand. If you're incapable of doing that, that is a failure. That is not a virtue. That is not a reason to say, well, nobody can understand this and therefore I don't care about it, because you will have bad consequences later on.
Yeah.
So normalization, wrapping all this up, normalization is in use in the industry. It is not used as much as I'd like it to be. It is not as well understood as I'd like it to be. Like Mala says, much of it is common sense. They are the natural application of relational design, of set theory, of relational theory. It can be, in its most abstract form, rather turgid, rather difficult to grasp, but it doesn't need to be. Go read Lewis Davidson. You can get, I don't think Lewis did a great job in the version of the book that I have on fifth normal form, but 1 through 4 and Boyce Codd does a pretty good job.
He does.
I try in this talk in Perfectly Normal. Go check it out. Frankly, Boyce Codd normal form, fifth normal form, live it, learn it, love it. Sixth normal form, a little weird, but might be useful.
So
First normal
am
form.
I wrong in thinking that, I always thought Boyce Codd was part of third, Kevin?
Nope, it's the opposite. So Boyce Codd normal form is the general form of second and third. Second and third normal form technically only apply when you have a single key. So if I have, basically, second normal form, I have a multi-part key. Third normal form is a singular key. And if I have multiple candidate keys, then one of the candidate keys could be in third normal form, while another candidate key is not. And that's what Boyce Codd normal form prevents. So Boyce Codd does everything second and third do, plus more guarantee. And that's why I just say ignore second and third, understand Boyce Codd, which is functional dependencies. And functional dependencies are all tied to super keys. If you don't understand what that means at all, check out the talk. Mala posted a link in there. And I'm sure someday I'll be able to give it again somewhere. This is the final, the part where I will say, yeah, it is really difficult to get a normalization talk accepted anywhere.
This is 100% true. This is 100% true. And part of it is like things propagated, like that tweet we had, and people thinking that they're beyond. I mean, at least during the time that I graduated into the database world, it was somewhat uncool to even think that you were maintaining, ER diagrams of databases and such. It's like, who does all that anymore? I don't know how that kind of thinking evolved, but it has evolved and it still exists.
Yep. And Solomon wraps it up really well. Normalization is a foundational skill and concept. You don't need to talk about normalization in a formal sense in day-to-day work, but a database professional needs to be able to think in those terms in order to be successful working with relational databases. Like wax on, wax off. Exactly. You practice, you do this work, you get that form of practice in your mind such that you can apply it in circumstances later on without even necessarily knowing that was the thing you applied. It's like algorithms. You go through algorithms classes not because I need to understand what this sort algorithm is. I need to understand 9 different types of sorts algorithms. You go through that because I may need one of these later on, but I need the pattern, the way to think, such that I can sublimate that method of thought and apply it later on in other circumstances. That's what we're aiming for here. That is the ideal of learning. I mean, if I'm going to close again on Plato, I'll do it if I have to, as much as I hate Plato. And with that, we are not going to rant about Plato tonight because we are all out of time. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you have a wonderful evening. And remember, tomorrow night, we will have a presentation. We are having to call an audible. Talk about that tomorrow, but we will have a different presenter for tomorrow night. We're getting everything set up. So come check us out. And regardless of when we see you next, everybody take care. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.